go into every single project asking the question, why can't AI do the job here? As opposed to release, let's say, ChatGPT into the wild, let people test it, and just organically people will start to adopt this and drive adoption. You kind of get mixed, in many cases, very poor results with a technique like that. When that next iteration comes along around an innovation and automation, people often want to just apply that innovation to existing things versus new. So making sure that you apply these new innovations to areas where traditional forms of automation didn't work or just didn't work well, I think that's where you're going to see a lot of traction because there's just so much work to automate. I think the biggest trap some companies run into is try something out, you get discouraged, and you sort of give up and move on to the next thing. And then you turn around a couple years later and you find yourself way behind, and everyone asking themselves, well, where did we go wrong? Why were these other companies able to crack this issue? And it's not because they started with better data to begin with. It's not necessarily that they just thought of something you never thought of. It's just they stuck with it. They persevered. They tackled each one of these issues in kind and got to the place where they were at. And so it's really important to kind of have that orientation, if you will.
Welcome to the New Automation Mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. So today I have with me Michael Heric. He's the senior partner in Bain's technology and cloud services practice and is actually the leader of Bain's global automation capabilities. So Michael, welcome. And look, you've seen this automation game for many years now. I mean, multiple decades, actually. You've seen BPR, there was a phase where, everyone did the BPO outsourcing. Then obviously RPA came in last decade. And now we have these LLMs and AI agents. I'm really looking forward to get a little bit of a history lesson from you, how you look at the automation domain and maybe what is changing now with these AI agents.
So Markus, first of all, thanks for letting me join your podcast here. It's great to see you again. So in terms of a history lesson, what a great question. I've been doing this, as you know, for about 25 years, and we're in a really exciting time right now with, generative AI and now agentic AI as well. As you mentioned, in terms of a history lesson, if I just thought about sort of the history of automation, for a period of time, you had sort of BPM, and then you had different rules-based forms of automation like RPA as an example. And I think there, again, it was very exciting in the sense that there was just a lot of manual work, very rules-based. You could use this technology to get, a lot done. And in many cases to get a return on investment very quickly. But I sort of equated to when I, grew up as a kid, we had this thing called a Thomas guide. I grew up in Los Angeles, and you would essentially pull out this Thomas guide and you get from point A to point B, and you'd sort of look at the Thomas guide and you kind of get from point A to point B. Now with generative AI and soon and with agentic AI, I feel like, the world is really changing. Now it's more like GPS with navigation. You change your route and you can go, it will adapt on the fly, and you can either go right or left. You can get around traffic and that sort of thing. And so I see us moving from a world where it kind of felt like me as a kid using a Thomas guide to, basically using GPS and navigation in a car or on Google Maps, for instance. And so I think it's just an incredibly exciting time because I think so much of the promise that was out there around automation is now really becoming sort of a reality. And I think we're only really at the very early innings of this journey as well, really around both generative AI and now agentic AI as well.
Yeah, I love the Thomas Guide analogy. I remember that very vividly. from the 90s, going from A6 to L8, and then
Exactly.
you do your route. Well, it's quite a change what we have now,
For
with
sure.
your ways and all of the navigation. So, Michael, if you think about the whole universe of automations, it feels a little bit to me like with AI agents and LLMs and so on, we expanded the potential of automation. I'm just thinking of, like, how RPA did more task automation when we really kind of wanted to automate the end-to-end process. So there were always kind of like boundary conditions, if you want. Or another example, like if you think about unstructured data, that made life difficult for us. Like, we had a document to process and so on. And with the IDP capabilities of the past, that seemed a lot harder than maybe it should have been. How do you think about it? How do you feel like the potential of automation increased?
Absolutely, Marcus. I mean, I think first of all, you have to put everything in perspective. I do think what I've seen at many clients and just companies in general, many companies have gotten tremendous value from traditional rules based automation, like, for example, RPA, and still do, and are still investing in the platforms and that sort of thing. But to your point, it only takes you so far. Especially when you're dealing with things like unstructured data, for instance. As we just talked about, many processes are quite dynamic, where you need some judgment involved in the process. And that's where things sort of broke down. And so I see with generative AI and now agentic AI to really make this promise around end to end sort of process automation come true. But I think, we shouldn't forget just all of the value that's been created by traditional automation today. And I do think many companies are going to continue to use it. And I think it's going to be used in combination with things like generative AI. And for many of these AI agents, as we know, they're going to orchestrate, traditional forms of automation, LLMs, and other things to, fully automate these processes end to end. So it's a really exciting time. And I think we're only at the very beginning.
No, no, I mean, good point. And let's drill into this a little more, because I couldn't agree more. I think, I don't feel like the traditional automation or way of automating things going to go away. Actually, I'm curious where you see these boundaries. I mean, in terms of, or maybe put it a different way, where do you think AI agents and generative AI are a great fit? And maybe where are the other areas where the traditional automation that, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
has created a lot of value is still the best way to go? What would you advise clients?
Yeah. Well, I think first, if we're thinking about AI agents specifically, when I think about the conditions of, when you should really use them, right? It's when sort of tasks are, quite dynamic. They might be ambiguous, for example. There's a lot of, sort of decision making required. There's a lot of change in the environment, which something like, let's say RPA doesn't handle well. And the process from sort of start to finish isn't always well known. And I think if you place those conditions on processes, where I see it really working well and where we're seeing it with clients today are areas like, for example, customer service or in sales, as an example. So I think with AI agents in particular, we're seeing that, quite significantly at clients where, they're using AI agents to really, sort of diagnose different customer issues and really personalize the different steps in the journey, as an example, or with sales as well. What I would say around just sort of traditional automation, it's sort of the opposite of that, right? Where tasks are much more sort of repetitive, if you will. Things are, processes are pretty clear, they're pretty rigid, and I think in places like invoice processing, let's say within a finance function, I think there, traditional forms of workflow, RPA, AI augmented automation in those areas is going to give you a lot of what you need without necessarily using a lot of AI agents, for example, in invoice processing, because it's a pretty sort of well-known process. So I think for us, we're seeing the most exciting innovation just right now happening in places like customer service in particular.
No, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it almost feels to me it's a little maybe for people who are used to what automation was in the past,
Yeah,
which was kind of like I think when we think about automation, we think about factory robots, right? In a way, and that was always a domain of like what you explained. Highly repetitive. You can give clear instructions. You need very tight quality control, but there wasn't much variability. And
right.
now we're almost expanding kind of a new dimension of automation, which is actually almost like what we don't intuitively, what we don't think of as automation, which is kind of these more
Right.
ambiguous situations, more complex, where maybe there's so many rules that before it was like really really hard to do it. That does feel to me like it's an expansion of what we can do.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, not just, something like invoice processing, for a lot of companies, they have, sort of these scheduled or batched, big data transfers between systems and things like that. And, a lot of automation tooling around that. And I think you're not going to necessarily see that sort of replaced. I do think, Marcus, one of the traps that I've seen, some folks get into is when that next iteration comes along around an innovation and automation, people often want to just apply that innovation to existing things versus new. So let's say, for example, something's working just fine with RPA as an example, or some other form of automation. You know, Folks immediately takes, let's say, generative AI, and they want to apply that basically to something that's already working really well, as opposed to something where there's a real gap, where it's almost like new to world. And I think, making sure that you apply these new innovations to areas where traditional forms of automation didn't work or just didn't work well, I think that's where you're going to see a lot of traction, because there's just so much work to automate. I think, you've seen probably many different studies out there where they say, let's take knowledge based work. It's anywhere from, 50+% of the work can be automated. And with generative AI, that sort of creeps up even to a higher number of anywhere from 60 to 70%. And we're only sort of less than probably 20% automated. So we've got a long way to go, just using traditional rules based automation, let alone generative AI and soon AI agents as well. Just a lot of white space.
No, it makes sense. The one thing that shocked me the other day, I was using ChatGPT and we were crafting like an email. First of all, it was shocking to me how well ChatGPT did.
Yeah.
But then the other thing that shocked me was a little bit also the aspect of change management. We think about automation and in the past there was a big topic was always change management. How do you get people to adopt to maybe a new way of doing this automated? Also, when
Yeah.
automations change, how can you get people to adapt to these changes? Where with these agents or ChatGPT, it was almost shocking how quickly ChatGPT just adapted to the new situation, said, okay, well, if you want this, then let's go this other way. I mean, if it felt like change management kind of was in a whole new stratosphere almost. I don't know. Are you guys thinking about that at Bain?
Oh, 100%. I think what's also interesting is, and I wrote an article on this where, the lessons learned actually from automation can be applied to generative AI. And I think with agentic AI as well. There was just a memo sent out by the CEO of Shopify. And I don't know if you saw that, basically around sort of change management. And I also had a colleague here at Bain that wrote an article on a similar topic here as well, on how so many companies are doing sort of like small little pilots, but how do you really scale this? How do you make the change management really work for you? And I think the Shopify example is a great one, in the sense of, they're asking basic questions like, okay, you have a new project, assume you can't get any additional resources, for instance. How would you do this work using AI? How would you use this using, for example, generative AI as an example? And if not, why? So it's almost like go into every single project, assuming, asking the question, why can't AI do the job here? As opposed to, I think for a lot of companies, it's sort of like release, let's say, Chat GPT into the wild, let people test it, and just organically people will start to adopt this and drive adoption. And you kind of get mixed, in many cases, very poor results with a technique like that. You get a whole bunch of little pilot projects, and people might say they're doing some things that are really, interesting and exciting, but when you sort of open the hood and sort of look in there, it's really only, a small number of people within that enterprise or within that company that are really doing interesting things. And the vast majority of people, it's just not really scaling. They're just using the old ways of working. And so I think, I love it when I see an example like what you saw recently here with that memo from the CEO of Shopify.
No, I mean, there's just so much value in it. So I think it does make sense to mandate that top down. Look, I'm curious about one thing. So there was a time um, when people almost like outsourced a lot of these automation troubles to someone. It's like almost like, you take care of it, like BPO and so on. Do you see any change there with the LLMs and with generative AI and AI agents? I mean, do you feel, what does that mean? Is BPO going to become less important than in the past, or do you feel people will maybe insource some of this more? What would you recommend to clients? Also, I'm curious. I don't have a clear perspective on that topic yet.
I mean, it's a great question. I think BPOs in particular are really going to have to adapt their business model. I mean, already they were a bit threatened, right, with RPA and other forms of automation. You saw many BPOs, for example, and IT outsourcing companies, for that matter, as well, make investments in this area, right? Building their own sort of platforms to deliver automation, but also, buying assets, creating partnerships, and things like that. I think with LLMs and AI agents, the pressure on BPOs is just going to go up. And right now, at least for many of my clients, I find like the level of innovation for many companies is moving faster than perhaps many BPOs and outsourcers can respond. Um, so I think it's going to be an interesting time. I think there are going to be outsourcers in this area. I think the real question is going to be, who are those outsourcers that you're going to use? Who are going to be those leading providers, and are they going to be the same ones in the future as they are today in terms of the various market leaders and so forth? I think the jury is really out on that.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So look, I mean, you mentioned yourself 25
Yeah,
years. You've done the automation game, so there's a lot to learn from you. But the one thing also, obviously, being at Bain, you see a lot of clients and see them doing different projects, and you already referred to some, for example, customer support and sales being like hotspots of this generative AI agent adoption. But I'm just curious, like what do you see out there? What do your clients have success with this new form of automation? And then maybe where do they still have challenges with
sure.
what's not resolved?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of success, I think we're really proud as a firm of a few things. One is we actually use these technologies internally within Bain. I believe we were the first professional services firm to partner with OpenAI as an example. And we're one of the earliest adopters and fastest adopters of ChatGPT in the enterprise within Bain itself. So we actually, eat our own cooking, so to speak, here. We're actually using this technology every single day in the job that we do. I think also with clients, we're pretty excited about some of the success stories that we've created together with our clients. I mean, you've probably seen a couple of examples. One that we're particularly proud of is with Coca-Cola. So I think Coca-Cola was one of the earliest adopters of generative AI. In fact, they started experimenting with the technology before Chat GPT 3.5 came out. And we partnered with them and with OpenAI, and we've done some amazing things around marketing and operations together. And I think that's just one example. I think another, example where we've had some great outcomes as well as with Target, the retailer. So we've done some just really exciting things around, for example, a store companion for all the Target employees using generative AI as an example. Um, and things like, for example, something called a bullseye gift finder, which is an AI driven tool that helps customers find gifts. So we've done a lot of, I think, just really interesting things with our clients. I mean, not surprisingly, Marcus, of course, we see a lot of challenges implementing this technology. One is adoption. Even within Bain, getting everyone to adopt this technology is no easy feat. That's for sure. Other just challenges that we've seen is obviously data quality issues, just access to data is obviously a huge issue. Um, the integration challenges to get to those data sources, and for example, with AI agents to connect to other forms of automation, other systems as well, is obviously one. I think just trust and governance is another significant issue, right? Especially when it comes to AI, and then just I think general change management. I mentioned this thing around adoption, but there's a lot of fear on what the impact of these agents are going to be on people's jobs, on the way they work, and things like that. And some of these fears are real, and some of them, I think, in the end, may in fact be even misplaced.
How are things around ROI? The old forms of automation. I think it's been proven that this can save cost and so on. How's the new world? Is it more of a better quality, a better customer experience, or is there
Yeah.
like real hard ROI?
I think there's both. I think what's interesting is, I did an article on, lessons learned from sort of traditional automation in the generative AI world, as an example. And I think what's interesting is many of the folks that worked in traditional automation and were able to scale these programs and get an ROI. Because if you remember, in the early days of RPA, when you might spend $50,000, $100,000 on RPA, people are like, "Where is the ROI? I don't see the ROI. I might save, for example, hours in, say, the monthly close process in finance, but I haven't really reduced my cost in finance." For a lot of those companies, they overcame these challenges. They were able to scale these programs and to get a real return on investment. And I think for many of those clients that were able to get success in automation, and this is what our research sort of demonstrated, they have also now been able to get a return on investment, hard dollar savings from generative AI as an example as well. And I think soon it will be with AI agents as well. I think we're, fairly early days there, but they are getting a return on investment. They are getting real savings, applying the same lessons learned. I mean, Marcus, you've been around these technology transitions for a long time, which is, each one kind of seems new, exciting, as if we're in a completely different world with where all the rules are different. But in fact, there's actually quite a bit to learn from prior technology transitions that if you apply those learnings in the new one, you can actually get a competitive advantage, scale faster, get an ROI faster. And I think we're seeing that same thing play out here now.
I'm curious. I mean,
Yeah.
look, some of the use cases like customer support seems obvious, right? I
Yeah.
think if you interact with ChatGPT, I mean, most people get the idea. It's like, hey, this
Yeah.
could help customer support. Um, I'm curious. Are there any use cases that you think are underappreciated? Maybe use cases that people don't see yet, and you think they should be
Yeah.
looking at? I mean, I'm thinking, for example, compliance. Like, I feel like these LLMs have the opportunity to probably spot anomalies much better than anyone before. But I don't see too much of these use cases. I'm curious. Any
Yeah.
other examples?
Great point. I not only run our automation capabilities and are a member of our technology practice, but I lead our practice that we call corporate support, which is all the different G&A areas. So the back office, basically. And while there's been a lot of excitement around, let's say, generative AI in the back office, if you look at the actual data, the level of adoption around, finance, HR, legal, many of these G&A functions is relatively low. Most of the activity has been in places like customer service or IT or marketing, for instance, not in these G&A areas. I think some of it was driven by, you know, there are alternatives out there. Some of it's driven by it took a while for, the software vendors to integrate some of those capabilities into their software, et cetera. But a lot of it is just driven by, you know, concerns about the technology, all the things we mentioned before, data quality issues, trust and governance and those types of things. And so adoption really around finance or HR legal is still relatively low. So I think about finance as an example. I mean, generative AI and AI agents will have a huge impact on the financial planning and analysis function or the FP&A function within a finance organization. I've worked with some clients that have seen this opportunity, and are building very interesting, co-pilots that work alongside the FP&A analysts to help them with things like planning, scenario analysis, and reporting. The level of adoption is still relatively low. And the same thing in places like, HR and within, legal. Other forms of AI, like using traditional ML and things like that, um, are being used in these functions, but not really, generative AI at scale. And so I think then in the entire back office, in my mind, a lot of these core G&A areas are just really underappreciated in terms of the level of opportunity in these areas.
Is it the fact that they feel like they have to be very precise, like especially in finance, and that they're worried, okay, well, there's this well-published effect of hallucination and so
Yeah,
on, that it's a lack of control that they feel
yeah.
they have? Or like, why do you think, or is it maybe just it's more conservative kind of a domain of the business?
I think
I'm
some
just
of it is
curious.
around risk aversion, but I do think, to be fair, like if you thought about 2023, let's say I'm a finance leader as an example, and I want to use generative AI. Some of the concerns they had were, I think, legitimate. So let's take auditability. Early on, it wasn't really clear, if, for example, the LLM spit out a financial report, where did it get these numbers from? Like, how do I trace this back? And as you know, if you work as a finance person, it's absolutely critical that it's very, very clear where the numbers came from, how they were calculated, and there's a full sort of audit trail, if you will. And that was really hard to produce in the early days with generative AI. And so a lot of finance teams were, quite resistant in terms of using the technology. That has changed now, right? I think now some of the issues are more focused around data. And I think, just like anything, data is always going to be an issue. It's an issue today just using, basic Excel in a finance organization. Often you have to go run some SQL queries to pull out data from some, data source and manipulate those numbers. So not surprisingly, in a world with generative AI, data is an issue as well. So I think the ones that overcome that just, manage their sort of expectations, if you will. They basically say, okay, if I'm going to use this, let's make sure, maybe perhaps I scale down my ambition a bit, focus on these data sets that I trust, I know where they are, I know how to access them, and that sort of thing. So I think, data is probably a bigger issue now than, for example, just pure auditability as an example. So I think it's kind of changing, Marcus.
Hmm. And then, just to drill down on the data
Yeah.
topic, because I think that's important. I mean, first of all, there's structured data,
Yep.
finance numbers and so on, and then there's unstructured data, maybe
Yep.
what's in an email or in some, even like policies or standard operating procedures. That's data in a way. It's just written down, unstructured. Where do you see? I mean, you mentioned it that it was a challenge for companies if for adopting the new technologies. Like where do you see companies on average? Are they ready for that, or is there a lot of construction that needs to be done to kind of like work on that data foundation?
Yeah, I would say most companies are not fully ready yet when it comes to data quality, and that's sort of understandable. Um, I almost think, dealing with issues around data is sort of a never ending battle. It like never ends because there's always new data that's being created. Not only that, but, what does it even mean to say whether you're, you know, whether you have good data or not. Because part of the issue, Marcus, is around things like definitions and governance around data. I've worked with so many clients where the issue isn't necessarily, I don't know where the data is, I don't know how to access it, but like literally, we have different points of view around, let's say, data definitions. So if it's in finance, how do you calculate profitability of this product or this customer? And there actually is an alignment internally around that. So I actually think things would be easier around data if it was just a question of, I don't know where the data is at. Now I know where the data is at, and I just need to make it accessible. It's unfortunately a lot more complicated than that, which is it gets down into like behavior and alignment amongst people. And so I think in my mind, data is always going to be an issue, but you can't let issues around data quality just make you sort of throw your hands up in the air and say, well, I'm not going to try to tackle these new technologies, right? Otherwise, you're just leaving a lot of value on the table. So I think the question is, what do you do about it? Not necessarily, are you ready or not?
It's probably also like iteration. It
Yeah,
becomes more of like an almost like what the marketers do, right? They don't have a perfect solution from day one. They kind of try it out, like let's say advertising or something like that, or lead gen. I mean, there's an approach. You start, you iterate, you fine tune, and you probably change
right.
all the time. Maybe that's how life in the back office will look like also.
Right. I mean, there's something to this, sort of mantra around test and learn, which I think is very true, which is like you can't get discouraged very quickly, right? You've got to give it a try. You work with perhaps, a more focused, data set, whether that's structured or unstructured, because even with unstructured data, you need to know where it's at as well, and it needs to be accessible. So start with, say, a smaller data set that you feel is more reliable, get that to work and kind of scale from there. I think the biggest trap some companies run into is, you try something out, you get discouraged and you sort of give up and move on to the next thing. And then you turn around a couple years later and you find yourself way behind, and everyone asking themselves, well, where did we go wrong? Why were these other companies able to like crack this issue? And it's not because they were started with better data to begin with. It's not necessarily that, they just thought of something you never thought of. It's just they stuck with it. They persevered. They tackled each one of these issues in kind, and got to the place where they were at. And so I think it's really important to kind of have that orientation, if you will, that mindset.
No, that makes total sense. Look, listen. So I have a big question, and this almost is like a meta question because so far we've been talking about Gen AI and how
Yeah.
can influence very specific business functions or processes or use cases. But when I started out and I was consulting in the 90s, right? I did BPR, business process redesign, and it was somewhat frustrating, I have to admit. We did all these like big process flows, all the interviews, and then when you saw what actually came off it at the end in the IT implementation, it felt like a big letdown to me, at least. So I'm telling people that in my 30 years, that I've been doing this, I haven't seen anything bigger than what's happening right now. It almost feels to me like my analogy is always like, what happened with the internet to retailers, like in 2000. This is happening to people who work on business processes or business operations now with LLMs and AI agents. And what I'm referring to specifically is one of my realizations was that describing these step-by-step business processes, the deterministic business process, it's a form of programming in a way, right? A lot of people that I noticed, even in IT, weren't very good at it. And so I felt it was always suboptimal how this was all described. Now you're having a completely different, almost like a meta perspective how you go about this. You're not doing step by step anymore. It's almost like you're describing not the process steps, but the process actors. Like you're focusing a lot more on the people, and almost like you think about, hey, if I created a digital twin of this one role of employee, what would that look like? And it's a different mental exercise to do that. My sense, and we're very early on, right? But my sense is that we're actually going to be better at doing these process actor descriptions. I almost feel like we're going to get, because of that, we're going to get better at actually managing business processes. So it's a kind of a meta perspective on what will these generative AI do for business processes. I'm curious what.
Yeah.
Am I completely out of whack here? Or what do you see? What do you think?
I 100% agree with you, Marcus. I think, and I did a lot of business process redesign as well. And you would do these big projects and it would take weeks, months, whatever it might be. By the time you get to the end, business conditions have changed and the process has pretty much changed. And I think the problem was that doing business process redesign, even doing, for example, some of these large, ERP implementations and things like that, the world is moving so fast. These business processes are changing, and by the it's changing at a rate that's faster than you can keep up. So as soon as you're done with the business process redesign, the world's already moved past it, and things have changed. So you're constantly multiple steps behind, and so I think that's why it never seemed to work. It was always so frustrating. And I think now we're finally getting to a spot where technology can be flexible enough where it can adapt at the same rate as the world is changing. And when that happens, that's really exciting. And that's what I really find exciting with AI agents in particular, in the sense that, things are going to be able to change. Like, you merge with another company, you change your process, you change all your policies, whatever it might be. You want to change those processes, and like instantly, technology can finally evolve or respond or adapt to those changes, which I don't think ever occurred, at least in my lifetime, before with any alternative technologies. And so I think that's what makes it so exciting. Now, it's not going to be in 2 weeks from now. It's not going to be a month from now. It's going to take some time for this to play out, sure. But I think that is really the promise, going forward. It's not just end-to-end process automation. It's also this flexibility and adaptability piece of it that really makes it exciting, because that's the part that I think BPR just couldn't do, really, traditional BPR.
But it seems to, I mean, again, coming to change management, it seems like there's a lot of things we also have to unlearn, almost like, or have to like learn a new way of doing these things, and that's probably always going to be hard for people. I mean, there's a lot of things like, okay, it isn't fully deterministic anymore. I think people have a heartache with that. They probably live in this old world of the deterministic step-by-step processes, and now there's a new, more flexible.
I think they live in a world of exception handling that
Exception
creates
handling.
value for them. So it's almost like they like the deterministic piece, because then it creates exceptions, and that's when I can be the hero. That's when I can come in and I can fix the process and demonstrate my value. And I think the number of exceptions is going to go way down. So the question becomes, okay, now how do I add value in this new world? Am I necessary? Am I needed? And that sort of thing. And I think the answer is absolutely. There's just a new form of value. And I think some people are going to be able to jump on that right away and find new ways to add value. And I think other people are going to struggle, like you said, because, I mean, it's somewhat similar if you thought about it from, remember the old world where it was like the IT service desk. I remember back in the 2000s, it's like, what's the number one call you would get, if you were one of these internet service providers? It was basically like resetting your password. It was like half the volume, right? These call centers, just people calling saying, I can't remember my password. I lost my password, that sort of thing. All that volume's gone, right? All of that you can pretty much just do online with a self-service app, right? And so, but there's still plenty of people in call centers today, and there's plenty of work to be done in call centers, right? It just shifted to new types of work. Hopefully the shift to new types of work around AI agents is way more value add than the shift from password reset to some of the other, types of tickets that I still think are not that exciting, right? So, but I firmly believe it will be. But to your point, there's going to have to be a lot of reskilling, change management, and things like that to, you know, find what that value is. I mean, a great example of that is like finance, again, to use as an example, where, if you're an FP&A professional, I think the stats show you could spend anywhere from 60 to 80% of your time simply extracting data, reformatting data, cleansing data, putting data into another format, into Excel, whatever it might be. That's the vast majority of the job. And that's not really what FP&A professionals want to do. They really want to do the insight generation, have a seat at the table with their business leaders, helping them make real-time decisions and that kind of thing. But it's also scary as well, because to your point, it's very deterministic. If it's pull this information, put into a spreadsheet, clean it, that kind of thing. It's less deterministic of come to this meeting. You never know what's going to happen. You might be put on the spot. You might have to do an analysis that you may or may not know how to do. And so, yeah, it creates either a lot of excitement for people or a lot of fear.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I mean, it's fascinating what you just said. I would fully agree. It feels like, I mean, these AI agents are actually really good at identifying the exceptions and then also dealing with those. I mean, the baseload, the happy path of the process. I mean, as you said, it should be history by now. It should be resolved by self-service and traditional automation and all of that. So now it's on to the exceptions. I think the AI agents are actually pretty good at it. So I think one maybe frightening aspect is that they might call you out on stuff. I mean, they might actually be better at detecting and dealing with the exceptions than people are. I think the exciting part of me, and this is just like doing, like I told you about writing this high stake email, for example, is that working and collaborating and iterating with these AI agents on something is actually
creates a better product.
It's very creative. It actually feels like when you're having that dialogue with ChatGPT on getting to that email, it feels like, oh wow, we just accomplished something like major, right? It's like you almost like you're almost starstruck by how good ChatGPT comes out at the end with the result, but then you also notice that it wouldn't have gotten there without your feedback and your guiding it the right way. And so I think it feels like it definitely doesn't feel like that mind-numbing work of the past of just formatting data and transforming and so on. It feels like this is some stuff worth coming to work for.
Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, again, to use this example with the finance FP&A professional, not only do you free up the time, but with the AI agent, you can then go get competitor information. You can run different scenarios. You can do different things. You can do twice the volume of work, at least probably way more than twice, maybe five times more, of the amount of work to get to a better outcome. So you're way more productive. And to your point, that back and forth, using the LLM or using the agent as an example, in the creative process, you get a better outcome. I think where things go awry is when you just want to ask it, you just want let's say you're using generative AI and you just want the LLM to just do all the work for you. And there's really no back and forth. It's not part of the creative process. It's sort of just a one-way, request comes back output. I think when it's that sort of binary, to your point, you don't get nearly as much out of it as making it a participant in a creative process.
I think that's such an important point. I mean, listen, Michael. First of all, this was fascinating. Really appreciate it. I really hope the audience got a lot out of it. I know I did, and I tell you why. Because you talked a lot about the finance professionals. It's kind of funny, but on Thursday, I will be at a conference with only CFOs. So I think you just helped me a lot. I think I'll be so much smarter on Thursday, and I'll keep you posted.
By the way, here is a little anecdote for you. I went to a conference of a well-known news channel, and at that they had different CFOs, and they had this panel of CFOs on the stage, and they all talked about how they were using generative AI in the products. We're experimenting, we're piloting, and so forth. And then another CFO in the audience raised their hand and asked a question and said, how many of you are using generative AI or AI agents in the finance function? And every single one of them said, no, they're not using it at all in the finance function. And so a great indication, and some of these were like healthcare companies using generative AI, for example, around drug development, but they weren't necessarily willing to actually use generative AI in their own finance function. And so you'd be surprised. The back office seems like the most logical place to use it, but in fact, there's some of the lowest levels of adoption. So I would encourage you to challenge your audience around what they could do around generative AI in their finance function specifically.
I will do just that. So that's a very good point. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for your time. This was great, and then we'll keep the dialogue going and see where this goes. Hopefully, the backend functions will get it soon. There's so much happening, so it could all be different in 6 months.
Thank you, Markus.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.